That's my job, provide that access.
Well, we appreciate you coming along. Thanks a
Thank
lot.
you, sir.
Thank you. And don't forget to ask about the poodle skirt.
That's right.
The greater Bemidji area that'll guide our development into the future.
Members, county commissioners, they're appointed by their respective bodies.
Honey, or it can be local, you and I creating a business that then we take to a global perspective.
If you have a question, call and ask, we'll help you.
Nobody knows about it, and it's
Well, the
great
word's out now. Word's out now.
Your entire operation, how bring people in. So let's get involved. Economic development is one of the most important tasks we have.
It is. It is.
Great to hear about.
Thanks again.
Thanks, dude.
Thanks.
It's been a pleasure, Louis.
Good evening. It's 6:30 on Wednesday evening. I'm Lou Crenshaw, and thanks to Upstream TV, we're back once again with Inside Bemidji, where we showcase people and organizations working to make our community an even better place. And we're delighted tonight to have Phil Hodapp, the Beltrami County Sheriff, with us. And thanks for coming and joining us tonight, Phil.
Oh, you're welcome, Lou. It's my pleasure to be here.
So we're going to be around here the next hour talking about the Sheriff's Office, its responsibilities, what it does, the people in it. So stick around, and we're going to start by meeting Phil. Phil, I always ask everybody on this show the same thing because we all want to know it, and that is, where did you come from and how'd you get to Bemidji?
How'd you get to Bemidji?
Yeah.
I ask that question now. I feel like
Ask
I've
it
been
to
here for a
yourself?
while. Yeah. Exactly. Well, I was stationed up here originally back in 1985 with the State Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, and have been here ever since. Prior to that, I grew up in Mankato, and
So you're originally from Minnesota?
yeah, I'm a
Okay.
Minnesota kid.
Okay,
Yep.
good.
Yep, sure am. And but I spent 9 years down in Texas working in law enforcement.
This was during your law enforcement career?
Right,
Uh-huh.
right, yeah. Yeah, before I came back to Minnesota.
Okay, Texas, and was that early on? And
Yeah, that was early. That was when I was pretty young. I had been well. I don't know if you want me to go into the long song and dance about what.
Well, you
Oh,
were
wow.
you did a career change, right?
Yeah. Well, no, I was in college. You know,
Uh-huh.
and
Decided you'd get in the police force.
right. I'd grown up in a law enforcement family.
Oh, really?
My dad was a Minnesota State Trooper.
Okay, so
And,
you were already predestined, if you will.
Well, I think so, probably.
Now you took your first training in Texas, then, right?
Well, yeah, I was going to college for criminal justice at Mankato State, and
All right.
and then every winter break, there was a group of us guys that would go skiing somewhere out west. We did this every year, and one year in 1976 or 75, I guess it was, we were out skiing in New Mexico and making our way back home, and had stopped at a little divey motel in Amarillo.
Like college students would do.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, it was cheap. It turned out, I think, that it's a motel that probably was renting rooms by the hour because there was so much activity going on in there.
All right.
Anyway, the next morning I got up early and I noticed that the police station was nearby. So,
And you had a problem.
well, right, our room had been broken into during the night, and we had to shake someone out of there. And we actually did call the cops, as I recall, and they came and addressed the problem. I think it was just someone who had been overserved at a bar that was trying to get in the wrong room. Anyway, but I walked over to the police station the next day and was visiting with the desk sergeant and learned that they were going to be hiring later that year. So I took an application home with me and I filled it out and sent it off, not really thinking that I'd ever hear from them. And in April, so this is in December, in April of,
They said you got a job.
well,
Phil.
yeah,
Come on down, huh?
well, not really. I had to go down and go through all the testing and,
Okay, so
and
you
stuff.
took some training and testing down there.
yeah, yeah. And then I got offered a position as a recruit in the academy. And I went through their academy then,
All right, good.
and then became a police officer.
Okay, there,
Yeah,
and you
in
stayed
Amarillo.
for
Well, I
Amarillo.
stayed in Amarillo in the police department for 20 months, and then I went to the state police down there, and went through their training academy in Austin, and then became a state trooper, and was stationed down on the Gulf Coast in the Houston area.
Okay,
And then,
so you were all around Texas.
yep, and then I transferred back up to Amarillo, and worked there for a while, and then I got promoted to sergeant when I was, let's see, I think I was 26 or 27 years old, and assigned in investigations, what they called criminal law enforcement, and started working in narcotics. And then I was stationed in San Antonio, and worked
I'm
some
trying
cases.
to do my Texas geography.
Yeah, well, I really
San
got it wrong.
Antonio's down on the border.
Well, it's off the border a ways, but
Oh,
yeah,
okay,
it's,
okay,
our district covered part of the border.
okay.
Actually it covered Corpus Christi, you know, part of
Uh-huh.
the Gulf, and then the border counties are covered by another district,
Mhm.
but we wound up working all over in that country, you know.
And how did you get your way out of Texas back up to the north?
Well, eventually, my wife and I made a decision to move back to Minnesota. We had young kids, 2 young children, and there were some things going on down there.
In Texas?
Yeah, that scared us a little bit about raising our kids there, so
Mm.
we decided to move back to Minnesota, and I applied with the State Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, which was to do a job very similar to the one I was doing down there, and I was accepted up here, and I came up to Minnesota, and then I was very fortunate to be stationed here in Bemidji in 1980.
So you came straight through the cities and up to Bemidji?
Right.
Pretty quick, huh?
Right,
Had
yeah.
you ever been here before?
Yeah, I was in Bemidji back just a few years prior to that. My dad had a friend who had a cabin in Nevis, and my wife and I had been
Okay.
home for a visit and went up and spent a week at the cabin in Nevis, and of course we came up here to Bemidji, and also I had a brother, Bill, who had gone to college at Bemidji State.
At BSU?
Mhm.
So you had a family who knew the area?
Right, yeah,
Good.
Bill kind of briefed me up on how things are up here.
And what was the office that you came into in Bemidji?
Well, at that time, it was a pretty small office, occupied by a agent in charge, and I think we had 5 agents stationed right here.
And what was the
in Bemidji.
responsibility for that office?
Well, we covered the northern half of the state essentially out of this office, and
Out of Bemidji?
yes.
Good,
And
okay.
we worked major crimes like homicides and cross-jurisdictional drug smuggling cases and things like that.
Wow, okay. Is that office still here?
Actually, the little office, it's kind of funny, we actually had an office in the old kindergarten center. Now, what is the school district kindergarten center now used to be the state office building, and we had an office in there, and back then the kindergarten center was created, and we still occupied space in that building. And but now since then, in about 2002, I think, a new facility was built here for the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, and it's out by the airport, it's staffed now by several agents who work the investigations. And
But
then,
no longer the whole north of the state?
yeah, no, they still
the whole
cover the
north of the
north.
state, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
And
There's
this
some
is a
satellite
state
offices.
agency
Right,
for major crimes, right?
that's right.
And they're still here.
And there's a lab
Good.
out there with technicians and scientists too.
Really?
Oh, yeah. They
So
do
this
lot
is
of
like
the forensic science.
the investigative kind of.
Mhm.
Okay.
This is the satellite laboratory for the big lab in St. Paul.
Great. And at some point, though, you made the transition over to being our Beltrami County Sheriff. So
I
how
did.
did that happen?
Well, at the time, this would have been in '06, Sheriff Keith Winger was retiring, and so there was an open seat, and so I decided to throw my hat in the ring, and I ran for sheriff and got elected. So I
And that
left
was
my
06, 07?
Yeah.
Okay.
well, the election was in '06, and I took office on
Okay.
January 1st of '07.
Now, since I know little about law enforcement, yours is an elected office, but usually like a chief of police station in a city, isn't that an appointed office?
Yes,
So that's different, right?
it is. Yeah.
And why is that?
Well, the office of sheriff is the only elected law enforcement position in the country.
We didn't know that,
Only
did
one.
we? It's the only one.
Yeah,
Okay, I'm gonna stop you there. You've been our sheriff since 2007. Spent a lot of time in Texas, came from a family of law enforcement, was studying it in college, trained up through a variety of jobs, and the reason I'm doing this is because, you know, Phil and I, we have a list of subjects about all of the amazing things that his department does, but we decided we wanted to talk some history. And he brought some history and said, you know, it'd be fun to talk some history. And I said, good, I'm going to start. And he doesn't know what I'm going to say, so I'm going to start. We're going to go way back, or I'm going to go way back, and then you can start filling in the rest of the years. Sheriff. Sheriff was originally the Shire Reeve.
the reeve of the sheriff.
The Shire Reeve, and that's a Saxon word. I like that because my family name is Saxon. So the Shire Reeve, he was originally the governor of the Shire, and he was appointed annually by the king.
That's right.
And he was above all the noblemen for as long as he had that tenure. And anyway, I'll go on. The position has now lost running of the courts because he used to run all the courts, all the judgments. And of course, you know, Magna Carta and all that, we now have county courts, and we had county courts here in Beltrami. So that system evolved. But the sheriff, or the Shire Reeve, kept keeping the peace, seizing forfeitures. I love this. This is old stuff. Making arrests. And employing under sheriffs, bailiffs, jailers. I love this. It was spelled Gaolers,
Yeah.
jailers. And this is my last one, and I liked it the best. And raise the Posse Comitatus when the occasion requires.
Posse Comitatus.
And you still do all these things.
Pretty
kind
much,
of.
yeah.
I don't know if you
Yeah.
ever raised a posse.
Oh, sure.
You have?
Oh, yeah.
I love it.
I mean, that's our volunteer groups now. You know,
Mhm.
we have quite a contingent of volunteers, and we have a sheriff's posse here in our county.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow. Well,
We
and then
sure do.
at the days when I was reading this history, the sheriff's posse could be raised from any man in the county over 15 except a clergyman, and I forgot what the other was, and then anyone who was infirm. So.
Yeah, or a crook.
Probably.
Yeah, you didn't want a crook.
All right, that's my history. Your turn.
Well, you know, Lou, you did a great job of summarizing that. When the Pilgrims came over to our country then and started to form their governments here locally, initially they called counties shires.
Okay.
And they adopted this system from England.
Okay.
And then it would have been in the early 1600s, they had their first sheriff appointed. So the office of sheriff in the United States goes back that far. It's the longest standing law enforcement office in the country.
And with a tradition of being elected.
Right.
Okay.
In the United States, they started electing the sheriff right away in the 1600s.
Okay.
So it was a person who had the public trust, and that's holds true today. I mean, that's what differentiates the sheriff's office from any other law enforcement agency is first of all, the county sheriff is elected. He's not appointed by a city council or a county board or a county administrator or anybody like that. And so it's an office of true public trust, and the sheriff answers to the public that he serves, and operates his office independently, his or her office. We have some female sheriffs in Minnesota too, and really does it at the trust and behest of the public that he serves. So, for me, it's been a terrific honor, and it's very humbling to be, selected to be the person who the people of the county have faith in.
When you put it that way,
keep their pay.
For sure.
Their safety and their peace, We had talked earlier about, how over the course of time, law enforcement has evolved, and now it's actually, back when I was a kid, we didn't really refer to police officers as law enforcement officers. They were police officers or troopers or deputies, Now,
Right.
pretty much everybody is kind of rolled into the law enforcement officer term, and truthfully, I don't really care for that. I think we're peace officers first and foremost. And if you look at our statute that governs the office of sheriff, that's the first charge in our statute, is to keep the peace of the county.
To keep the peace.
Right.
And that was the first one way back.
Way
too.
back,
Keep
yeah.
the peace.
Yeah.
So, I want to hear your history,
Oh.
and then I want to bring you right back there, okay?
Well, it was kind of funny. I found some quotes from, prior to the 1800s, there really was no guidebook or policy manual or anything like that for police officers of any kind. And in the 1870s, there was a sheriff in Colorado by the name of David Cook who wrote a book, and he called it Hands Up, or 20 Years of Detective Life in the Mountains and the Plains. But he laid out a set of rules or guidelines for officers, and here's some of them.
Okay.
Never hit a prisoner over the head with your pistol, because you may afterwards want to use your weapon and find it disabled.
Okay.
Never
Especially
attempt to
if
make
it's
an
hard, yeah.
arrest. Oh yeah, well. Here's another good one. When you attempt to make an arrest of a desperado, have your pistol in your hand or be ready to draw when you make yourself known. My motto has been, it's better to kill two men than allow one to kill you.
That's a pretty tough guy.
It is.
Yeah.
Here's a good one, and this holds true today. After your prisoner is arrested and disarmed, treat him as a prisoner should be treated, as kindly as his conduct will permit. You will find that if you do not protect your prisoners when they are in your possession, those whom you afterwards attempt to arrest will resist you more fiercely. Now, it's kind of interesting that's one of the rules he talks about, because back in that time, it was often a problem where lynch mobs would form after a heinous crime occurred,
Right.
and the
right.
sheriff would have someone in custody,
And so he would have to protect them.
protect them
from
and
the
bring
mob.
them to court.
Yeah,
That was
okay.
his job.
Sure. And it still is. And it always has been the sheriff's job to bring them safely to court.
That's right. And now, of course, we have a pretty large jail here, and our job is still the same. It's to protect the people who are in our care and custody.
I want to take you back because I really liked where you were going, but I wanted to hear that first,
Yeah.
which is pretty interesting. You said, okay, law enforcement officers is not a, but how does it work out of the, you were talking a little bit about the objectives of your department, and I wanted to get some of this public safety aspect into it. How does that work out between the public safety and because you do have to enforce the law in many instances.
Oh, sure.
And you got a lot of responsibilities, but at a real high level, how does that work out between enforcing the law and assisting, if you will, with public safety?
Well, it's kind of an interesting situation, but like I said, I view our job as being peace officers first. So our
Okay.
job is to protect the public, and sometimes we have to protect them from themselves, you know. In the instance of, say, a drunk driving arrest, you may have to arrest somebody who's driving down the road drunk and have prevented them from crashing into an innocent family and taking a life there, or just running off the road and taking their own life.
Yeah, good,
Or
good
injuring
example.
themselves.
Good
you know.
example.
But, you know, and I look at traffic safety being one of our missions in the county because of a number of reasons. It's one of the places where we were experiencing a lot of death on our roadways and a lot of permanent life-altering injuries to people, you know. So we had to up our proactive enforcement of the law. But in the same respect, our job is to make neighborhoods safer for people to live in, you know. So we've been working on projects to get our officers out of the office more and out into the field on patrol. Just that presence alone out in a neighborhood a lot of times prevents a lot of crime from occurring, you know. And then having the officers out there when something bad happens, and it could be anything like a medical event, someone has a heart attack, and one of our officers happens to be nearby with the
Equipment, training.
equipment, right, to be able to apply the pads and get someone their heart started again, hopefully, or maybe rescue someone who's drowning. All that kind of stuff plays into
The
you know,
public safety part.
right,
So
our
it's
job.
peace and public safety.
Yeah, and then if you think about, sometimes neighborhoods have people who aren't necessarily peaceful that live in them, and they're creating disturbances that concern everybody that lives in the neighborhood. Then
Okay.
our officers have to deal with those kinds of situations and solve the problem, go in, address whatever the issue is, and then hopefully bring about a successful resolution to the problem without necessarily having to arrest somebody or
But just a confrontation and try to resolve it. Right?
sure, yeah, a lot of times, you know, it might be a loud music complaint or
Right.
barking dog or something like
Yeah,
that
yeah,
that's driving everybody crazy in the neighborhood, you know?
yeah, and that's true, that happens.
It does.
I want to talk about your organization a little. You know, I was on your webpage and it said that your organization is handling 3,000 square miles of territory,
That's right.
44,000 residents of the county, and in the summer, the visitors balloon that number out. So what's your organization like, and what kind of, how do you structure them?
Well, we have several divisions in the department. We have the patrol division, which is staffed by sworn officers. Those are called deputy sheriffs,
A sworn officer is,
a deputy, and they're peace officers. They
okay.
have all the powers of arrest and
What's it mean by sworn? They've taken an oath or a
Yes,
pledge,
yeah.
or what's that like?
in Minnesota, that's the term for someone who's a certified peace officer, who is post-licensed and has sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution
Okay, I
and
understand.
protect the public and
But it also implies a kind of a training as well as, and
licensure.
capability and licensing. Okay.
Right.
How many sworn officers are in your department?
Well, counting all of our full and part-time deputies, we have 37.
Okay, so they're all deputies? All
Well,
what you call
all 30,
sworn
yes,
officers
are deputies.
All
And
right,
we have them assigned to functions like patrol,
right, like you were just talking about.
Yep.
Be out there,
on
be
patrol.
present,
Mhm.
deal
Respond to calls and
Calls.
deal proactively with
with. Do you like
crimes that you see
keep
happen.
them out in some kind of pattern so they're kind of out there?
Everybody would like to know that, wouldn't they?
I don't know. Would they?
It's top secret.
All right, we're not gonna tell you that. But he's got a plan, I can tell.
But yeah, we have the patrol officers, and then we have investigators who work major crimes investigations that go on in our county. We have court security deputies that are stationed in the courthouse.
Just to make sure that nothing happens in the courthouse?
Well, I don't know if maybe the public doesn't know this, but courthouses can actually be some of the most dangerous public buildings that we have in the country.
Nope, I didn't know that.
Yeah, we have, well, in fact, we had a very bad shooting that happened over in Cook County about a year and a half ago, where the county attorney was shot several times, and there were some other people that were shot by a defendant who had just been convicted and was very upset, and he had
Got
a
his
gun.
hands on a weapon.
Right, he had a gun in the parking lot, and they didn't have point of entry security like we have in our building. So, so that's something too that folks may be interested in knowing, is if you come to the Judicial Center in Bemidji, you have to pass through a point of entry secure area, which is kind of like going through a TSA checkpoint at an airport.
Yeah, I've been through it.
Yeah. And the whole point of that is to prevent any weapons from being brought into the courthouse, so that we know that the courthouse is always a secure facility. The judges,
Yes.
the victims, you know, the defendants, the juries, everybody is safe, the prosecutors.
Yeah, I wasn't surprised by that when I went in, since we had the same system back when I was living in Delaware. But I was surprised you take people's cell phones. You won't let people bring a cell phone in.
That's because there's a court order that, and we kind of got off track on that, but one of the things the sheriff does is enforce orders of the court. And we have a court order here from our 3 sitting judges that prohibits the use of cell phones inside the building by visitors.
Okay.
You know, the officers obviously can have them for.
So they made a
communication
court order,
purposes.
and that's the way it is. You enforce it.
That's right,
Got it.
yeah.
Got it. So you got 37 deputies?
Well, yeah, and I never got.
Sorry, go ahead.
We also have recreation deputies who do the patrolling out on the lakes, on the trails, you know, winter and summertime, snowmobile and ATV patrolling, and
Yeah, and I'm going to interrupt right there. I
Yeah.
want to hear what you say, but I didn't know this until today, or didn't think of it, and so they might not know it either. Your office has responsibility for keeping the peace and safety in the forests and on all the waterways as well,
everywhere in the county.
everywhere in the county.
Yes,
And so you have deputies that do, you call them recreation?
right. That's because their assignment is to the recreational areas of the county. You know,
Okay.
essentially all the lakes, all the rivers and the trails in our county that, you know, we have this time of year particularly, and during hunting season, we have a lot of people that come here just for that purpose, to
Sure.
be out on the lake.
Tourism.
Yeah,
Big
that's
deal.
a big deal.
And,
So we wanna
and
keep
something we
people
like.
safe. Yeah.
We like it.
Right, right.
But let's keep them safe while they're at it. What kind of things happen out there? I mean, I can see somebody drinking too much and running their boat, and, you know,
Mhm.
flipping it over or whatever, but like out in the trails in the backcountry, is it mainly medical or?
There are medicals, there are people who get lost.
Yeah, I
You
know
know,
that.
and they count on cell phones to be able to be recovered. In a lot of our area up in the northwestern part of the county and the northeastern part, there is no cell phone coverage. So they get out on a trail somewhere,
I didn't
and they're
realize that.
counting on their cell phone, you know, GPS or whatever they've got on
Uh-huh.
the cell phone, and all of a sudden they lose connectivity and they're done. And they get lost. And so our job then is to go find them. And, you know, we had a case not too long ago where we had a hunter that had been lost out in the woods for quite a while. And he was in an area where it was real spotty coverage with his cell phone. And he called into the 911 call center and was able to get connected. And they were able to map his phone and figure out where he was at and start getting help up into that area. Well, then they kept losing contact with him because, like I said, he was in a spotty area.
Yeah.
But eventually they were able to, by him calling back, and they told him, you know, if we lose connection, you call us back. and try and get us back on. They were able to direct the rescue officers out right to where the individual was and get him out of the woods. So it worked out really slick. Because they could also see our officers who had their phones, you know.
Okay, so they could tell
Yeah,
you
they could tell
you're
them,
on the right
go
track.
left, yeah, go right. Yeah. So it's pretty slick.
Let's take a break. We're already a half hour into the show. We've got a lot to cover. With Phil Hodapp, our Beltrami County Sheriff, we're talking about the organization. We're going to get on and talk about some of the things, the work, if you will, of the County Sheriff's Department. And we do this every Wednesday night on Inside Bemidji. So thanks for joining us, and please stay with us. I didn't get through organization because I had a question from you, and that is, what do bailiffs do? It's such an old word, and I guess I've never known.
Well, the bailiffs run the court. Actually, well, I shouldn't say that. The judge runs the court, but the bailiffs are in charge of making sure that the prisoners are moved into the courtroom when they need to make their appearance. They're in charge of courtroom decorum, making sure that people aren't acting up in the courtroom. Obviously, the judge...
And security as well.
Right. The judge enforces the courtroom rules and things like that, but their job is to actually address the problems, you know.
Okay, so they're on hand to make sure that it's run in an orderly way.
That's right.
Got it. I see, I never knew that, actually. I wasn't kidding you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, let's go on while the evening's young and talk about some of the work, okay? How does it work? I always want to know.
Well, you know, we actually skipped several divisions of the department.
Well, then let's do some more. Good.
Because it doesn't really work to explain it, I suppose, until you understand the all-encompassing nature of our sheriff's office.
Okay.
We talked a little bit about court security, but we have jail corrections officers, which is about a third of our department.
Yeah, I missed that. Correction officials
Officers.
or officers.
Right.
Uh-huh.
And they're in charge of the jail. We have a jail administrator, an assistant administrator, and then some programmers who are the ones that organize all the programming for the prisoners. You know, we have counselors that are coming in and visiting with prisoners. We have clergy that come in. We have all kinds of different programs, like a GED program that.
Sorry, what's that?
You know, general ed.
Education.
Someone
Okay,
who
okay.
doesn't have their high school diploma yet
Can take an
pursue
education.
that when they're
Right,
when they're
okay.
in jail. We have lots of different programs like that going on. Plus chemical dependency counseling and assessment and mental health treatment, all that kind of stuff.
My goodness.
And then we also have a medical division in the jail. We've hired out contracted with a company called MED that takes care of our medical issues with our prisoners. Because, you know, we talked about how the sheriff is responsible for protecting the prisoners, but we're also responsible for their health.
Yeah, this has grown up
care.
into a big program. This concept
has
of
been,
keeping the mob away from them has suddenly become very complex, it
It
sounds
has.
like.
You know, usually a lot of the people that wind up in our jail for any length of time have some kind of a medical issue or possibly a mental health issue that needs to be addressed. You know, I don't view the jail as a place to keep anybody that has mental health issues, but unfortunately nowadays, because of the way things have gone in the mental health community,
Right.
and the lack of funding for proper medical
Putting those
mental
people
health
out to be
facilities,
homeless.
They wind, you know,
And
where
so
do they
it's
wind
either
up?
the jail or the homeless shelter, right?
Right, and
Tragic, but
it is,
they are.
yeah. So that's something that, you know, obviously we are constantly dealing with and hoping that the legislature will and Congress will provide funding to be able to deal with all the folks that need that kind of service.
So unfortunately, the jail is a big operation.
Well, it is, it's
About how
pretty
many
large.
people are involved in operating the jail, all of them?
We have 33 corrections officers, including the administration, and then we have these contractors in there that provide the medical care,
Okay,
and there's, I think, 3 of them.
excuse me.
And then we kind of skipped over a couple other divisions here that
All right,
are really
this is bigger
important.
than I understood.
Yeah,
Please.
we do the communications, the 911 call center for all emergency calls in the county. And then we dispatch for police, sheriff's office, fire, EMS, the hospital, mental health transport, anything having to do with emergency services, we do the dispatching.
So let me get that straight. So your communications center is involved not only with your direct reports, but it's involved with medical or road accident or a
Fire.
911, a fire. So
Medicals.
you make sure that all of the communications come into one center and it gets distributed information to the best kind of response? Is that the concept?
That's right, yeah. It's called a Public Safety Answering Point in Minnesota, or a PSAP. And, you know, the goal is to have kind of a one-stop shop for the public to be able to call 911 and get whatever emergency services they need deployed as quickly as we can. So our 911 call center has access to all those resources and immediately can contact them either via radio or paging or you know, whatever form of communication we need to use.
So the emergency call comes in and your people there are trained to know that that kind of an incident needs a fire response, ambulance response, and a enforcement response. And so they mobilize, and I'm just making this up, but as an example, they would mobilize certain resources depending on what kind of a call it
Sure,
was.
sure.
Okay.
You know, like you might have a really bad car crash out on Highway 2, and they would send police officers, and it would be law enforcement officers from potentially 3 departments: the State Patrol, Sheriff's Office, and Police Department may respond depending on where on Highway 2 it is. If there's a fire or the threat of a fire would go, EMS would go, and sometimes they'll deploy a helicopter. So then the police officers have to set up a landing zone, depending on what the EMS people are asking for at the scene. And then they might have to call MnDOT and say, geez, we've got fuel spilled all over the highway out here. We need to get you out here to clean it up. So MnDOT might
Or
call.
close the highway,
or
or
county
divert
highway.
traffic, or who
Exactly,
knows,
yep.
right? Yeah, okay,
Yep,
that's
so-
a great example.
Yeah.
And is this all done by radio?
Well, no, I mean, a lot of it is done by radio, some is by phone, some by pager, some by instant messaging, you know, over the computer system that we've got. We've got access to all of law enforcement cars using all those different systems, so we can send instant messages. A lot of times if people are calling in to the 911 call center and they're talking with the dispatcher on the phone and they're reporting whatever the incident is that they're reporting, the dispatcher's already entering that information on the screen, and the officers in the field can see it because it'll come up on their computer. So they know that dispatch is taking a call, let's say for armed robbery, you know, and that information's going to start coming up on their screen. They'll see it as it's being typed in.
Wow, this is fascinating. I'm glad you looped us back through communications, because it's something I really hadn't thought of. Where is this facility located?
It's in the law enforcement center.
Which is down here in the
Right.
county complex.
Right.
And that's where your office is?
That's
yeah?
right.
Okay, so it's adjacent around your offices?
That's
And
right.
it's manned, of course, 24/7?
24/7, yes.
And how many people are usually there? How many people does it take to run something like
Well,
this?
we have 2 to 4 people in there at any
Okay.
one time. And then, of course, we can call in backups if we need to.
If something big's happening.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
Or if there's a lot of communication.
Mm-hmm.
What a responsibility.
Yeah, it is. And then we also,
Is this typical of a county operation, Phil, or are we?
it is.
It is. This is a kind of a standard way this is handled. You have this one center so that it can coordinate.
There, some of the smaller counties in the state have combined their PSAPs. So they might have one public safety answering point that covers 3 different counties, in the smaller areas. But in an area that size, we might be talking about a geographical area that's still smaller than Beltrami County. And
We're an
3
unusually
departments
large-
combined that have less employees than we have in
than
ours.
you have. Yeah, that's a good question. Your entire operation, what kind of size is it as far as people?
Well, we have 99 employees total
Wow,
in the sheriff's
okay.
office, counting all of our part-timers. And then we also forgot about records. We keep all the records for all the law enforcement agencies in the county, which is the sheriff's office, the city police department here in Bemidji, and the Black Duck Police Department. And then fire keeps their own records, but eventually we're hoping that they'll go onto our records management system too.
What kind of records are these?
Well, all calls that come into law enforcement, there's initially an initial call report that's made.
Okay.
But that might develop into an investigation. It might be just a traffic stop, that results in a warning ticket or a verbal warning or a citation, or it could be an accident investigation.
So there's no delete button on these, but these are all held because they might be important if cross-referenced later. Is that the concept?
Well, that's part of it. We have to document everything. One thing about law enforcement officers and cops and peace officers and all of us, we're documentarians. Part of our job is to make a record of the things we see and do in case it's ever needed for court purposes or if the public needs it. It's amazing to me every day how many data requests we get in the door from the public.
And what would they be asking for?
Well, they're asking for copies of investigations, copies of accident reports. They may have lost their driver's license and they need to be able to come in and get a copy of their driver's license printout for insurance purposes or something like that. There's many requests that we get in the door for data. And one other thing that I haven't talked about a lot, or at all yet, is gun permits. The sheriff's office, I issue all the gun permits in the county. And so when people come in and apply for these permits, they do that at Records. They have to fill out a form. Records does all the backgrounding that's required by law. And then we issue the permits that people are asking for if they're qualified. And by that, you have to be a citizen and not have any disqualifiers on your record, like felony convictions or mental health commitments.
And those are the background checks you talked about.
That's right.
Now back to records. You were talking about how your communications center uses all kinds of different technologies, from pagers to online, and anyway. Is the job of your records management getting any easier with new technology, or is there so many increased records that it hasn't changed? Well, the reason I asked, Phil, is because earlier you were talking about getting your deputies in particular out on patrols and out into neighborhoods. And I just wondered how that was working out as everything gets more complex and yet technology comes in too.
Well, the technology actually has enabled that. Before we got the new technology that we have now, our officers, when they go out in the field and go on a call or address a problem or make an arrest or something like that, would have to come back to the office and do their reports. Now all that reporting is done in the field. If an officer has to, let's say he goes on a domestic call and One of the officers has to bring someone to jail from that, and the other officer has to respond to another call. Well, on his way to that call, he can dictate the report for the last call and download it into his computer, and then it's sent in for transcription, but from the car, and any research or data that he needs to add, he can add right from his car. So he never has to come back to the
So
office.
he can, he's got a computer there that he can use for research to add to his report?
Right, yeah, he can do any research on there. He can research all the databases from there. And then...
It's kind of a very strange example of a home office.
It is. Well, it is their mobile office.
Yeah, it's their mobile office now.
It really is.
And so now they can do their office work while they're out there in the neighborhood.
Well, and let's say that they pull you over,
Oh, let's
and
say
you don't have your driver's license, and you
Okay.
say, my name is Phil Hodapp, and they go, geez, I didn't think he looked like you. So they go back and they run me, and they go, well, here's a picture of Phil
Yeah,
Hodapp,
this ain't
it's not this
you.
guy.
Uh-huh.
So I'll have them come back and say, look at this picture,
Uh-huh.
this is not you, tell me your real name, you know, and until they get the right one, they can run them all until all the aliases that you would give, until we get to Lou Crenshaw. When you finally give up and say, okay, this is my name, then they
Put
can
that
run you.
cuffs
Oh,
on.
okay, yeah, you're under arrest for giving us a false
I
name.
didn't like this example, Bill. I mean, I got the story and I understand the point you're making, but
Yeah,
it was a
yeah.
rough example.
I don't think you'd ever do that,
No. I'm gonna
especially
do
not
that.
now that we know what you look like.
Yeah, that's right. I'd probably pull up a picture of me. Well, that was great. We went back and we talked about the running of the jail.
Mhm.
And you said you have a jail administrator.
Right,
You mentioned something about that.
yes,
Who, like, is in charge of that particular piece of your operation?
that's right.
Do some of the others, do you have like a communications
Yep, there's a communications supervisor.
supervisor?
We have an
Okay.
emergency management director. And that's another division.
Yeah, we didn't talk about that. We've got to kind of come back to that.
We
So-
have the chief deputy, myself, and then we have a sergeant in charge of investigations, and then 4 sergeants in charge of the patrol division. And then we also haven't talked about the task forces.
No, I want to do that.
Yeah.
What's EMD, emergency medical?
Emergency management.
Oh,
Director.
emergency
Yeah.
management, so I don't have a clue what that is. You better
Well,
share that with us.
Ever since 911, prior to that, counties all had emergency management directors, but it's become way more complicated.
What has
You know, exactly. One of the things that counties are required to do is have plans and contingency plans and Plan C through Z on how you deal with any kind of disaster or emergency or anything like that, and how you manage it. So we have, we all go through training on what's called NIMS, it's the National Incident Management System. And then our emergency management director deals with the state on a regular basis and with all the other EM directors in the area working on contingency planning for what do we do if a tornado strikes our county. Wadena County had a
Yes,
bad
just
experience
recently,
yeah,
right,
a couple of
right.
years ago, a few
Right.
years back. We had, last year, we had a bad windstorm.
We sure
came
did.
through
It took a
here.
lot of trees out up at my
Right.
place, and others were hit even worse.
Yep, and so our emergency management division deals with all of the planning and then all of the, behind a deal like that, FEMA will get involved, and the local entities can start to apply potentially for some FEMA grant dollars that may come, that may be assigned by the White House for a particular disaster. And the EM folks are the ones who have kept track of all of the expenditures, all of the documented everything that happened during the event, whatever it was, and then they're the ones who would apply for the funding to come back to the county to reimburse all of resources that went into a situation like that.
And that would be having, we had to pull in a lot of help. Is that what,
Right.
and when you talk about the resources and paying them for it?
Right, like, let's say that you have a wildfire that comes through the area.
Okay.
And you have to call on mutual aid to have fire departments from
Yeah,
10
I gotcha,
counties
I gotcha.
respond, you know.
Uh-huh.
And not to mention that, but law enforcement protection, let's say you've got an issue with looting or something like that, where you have to call out the National Guard.
Okay.
You know, in those kinds of situations, all of these agencies and departments will come together and do whatever needs to get done to solve the problem,
Yes.
you know,
But
but then,
afterwards.
right, after you go back home and start sorting things
All of
out.
these guys needed to be paid their overtime or their salary or.
Well, they're gonna get
their
paid by
equipment.
their home agency.
They will, okay, so they bail into help and their home agency foots that bill.
Right, that's part of the mutual aid
Gotcha.
agreement.
Good
But
for them.
then, you know, the local county or city or fire department will submit a claim back to the home agency, let's call it, the one that hosted the event, for lack of a better term, you know? And then if there are government dollars that are allocated for that, then that, you know, money will be divvied up based on the claims that are filed by the various entities that were involved in it.
When that big wind came through, July the 2nd,
And we had two of them, the 2nd and the 4th.
okay, the 2nd was one that clobbered us, I guess. Now, where were you?
On the 2nd, I was at home.
And you heard it was coming?
Yeah, I sure did.
Yeah,
Yeah, and we had everybody out.
and so you mobilized
Mhm.
people. Now, what was the word, did we have injuries? Did we have just roads closed with trees? What was the
We
biggest
had,
problem?
well, and power was out here. in
Power was
Bemidji.
out, yeah,
Um,
sure
and-
was, for 2 days,
Well,
Longer
and
for
in the
some
downtown area, and I don't know if you remember, but, you know, that's right when the water carnival's going on, so you had
That's right, I forgot
tons
that.
of people down
Yes,
there.
yeah,
So, you know, the early warning went out, you know, and hopefully people were seeking shelter before it hit. But then we had to deal with protecting the businesses in the city because power was out everywhere. And we had all that going on.
so with power out, you've got an issue of potential theft or
Oh, sure,
anything,
you know,
right?
looting.
Looting.
We didn't have anything like that.
Good.
But the police chief put a 10 o'clock curfew on, you might remember that.
No, I
that
missed
night.
that,
Yeah,
missed that, I was too busy up at my place.
yeah, and, you know, the thought was, you know, we don't need people out driving around in the dark, just
Yeah,
looky-loo, you
rubber
know.
and neck,
Exactly,
if you will.
so-
Yeah, let's see what happened.
right, and we needed to know that it was people who were dealing with the emergency that were out and about, and then potentially some people who might be up to no good, you know.
Yeah, sure.
So that's the idea behind having
Yeah,
a
sure.
curfew.
Well, I like that one point in that, and I hadn't thought of it, is that if you got a power outage and that kind of an emergency, you sure want the roads cleared and people out of their way so the emergency crews can do their work.
Oh, yeah, right, yeah. So, and in that case, we had a lot of help from
So that,
outside agencies.
so in that case, did your emergency management director or emergency management team and how were they involved?
Well, they were involved right away with what are we gonna do as far as, you know, let's break out the plan book, you know, let's go to
Sure.
the plan.
So they started making the decisions of, here's how we're gonna handle this, here's how we're gonna deploy, here's the help we need.
Actually, the
Further.
decisions usually are made by a group of people, you know, but a lot of times it's really helpful to have a checklist of, okay, here's the priority items that we need to address right now, boom, 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 boom. It's
Right.
really easy if you've already thought it through and come up with plans, you know, and
That's
that's
why
the
you
whole
got a
objective
contingency
here.
plan, right?
Exactly,
Sure.
yeah. And you know how it is, every plan, no plans are infallible, you know, but it's always good to have one, at least to kind of work from to start with anyway.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, sure.
because it speeds up your response.
Yes, and you can, once you have the plan, you can pretty easily see how this situation is different and in what way it's different, and therefore this part of the plan, we're gonna alter
Right.
for this case. But if you got nothing, then you gotta think it all through.
Exactly.
Much more difficult.
Especially when you're under a lot of stress, you know, which you are in a situation like that. People's lives are hanging in the balance, so you want to be able to respond as quickly as you can with the right resources and get them into the right positions right away. So,
This is a big organization. We've barely got into all of the things that Phil's organization is doing. We've talked about the deputies, 37 of them, sworn officers deployed in a variety of ways. We've talked about the mainly on patrol and in investigations. We've talked about the correction officials, some 30 number of them, and they're involved in the
jail.
operation of the jail, and they're separate from the bailiffs,
Court security.
who are involved in the court security. The judge runs the court, but they, if you will, run the system and make sure that it's orderly and under control.
That's right.
And then we talked about records management and how you keep the records for not just your own, but pretty much everything except the fire people now, and they might come into that system as well.
Yeah, we're hoping they do.
And you've got the jail administration as well. That's the correction official, but you've got an administration because you're supplying a lot of, and I don't want to call services, but you're interacting with prisoners in a whole variety of modern ways, just beyond feeding
Right.
them.
Right.
Like worrying about their mental health and their physical health and their education, and what a list. And you're running all of the communications for emergencies, which means medical emergencies, accidents that involve fire response, medical response. You might have state police. You even talked about bringing out the National Guard.
Yep, the sheriff's the only one that can call out the guard.
Okay,
Yeah.
what did I miss?
You know, we forgot to talk about civil process.
Okay.
This is another important part of the
Well-
sheriff's office. And all of our deputies are involved in that, but we have one.
What's the word even
specifically
mean,
assigned.
Phil? Civil process.
Well, every
You know what?
thing that goes on.
We're not going to talk about it.
Oh, are we?
You know, we're going to have to come back in the fall. We haven't even got the tip of this iceberg
That's
yet. And it's time to get out of here.
You're kidding me.
Phil, I told you we could talk for hours, but I had no idea we could talk for 6 hours. I'm Lou Crenshaw, and we do this every Wednesday at 6:30. We call it Inside Bemidji, and we showcase people and organizations working to make our community an even better place. And we're really glad you joined us. I especially hope you liked our history of the sheriff's responsibilities. And what we've been talking about all evening are the sheriff's responsibilities. This is a big organization, 99 people, and we didn't even get to all the volunteer organizations that they're interacting
That's
with.
right.
And as Phil's been talking, this organization that's concerned with our safety and security and our peace are doing so many things in the county, and we're just going to have to come back in the fall and give you a part 2. So all I can say at this point, Phil, is thanks for coming.
My pleasure.
I really enjoyed it. And got any last words?
I do. I just want to tell everybody out there that's listening, Lou, that they should be very proud of the organization that protects them and serves them every day in the sheriff's office. You have some incredibly talented and good people working for you every day, and I'm very proud of them, and you should be too. Thank you very much, Lou.
Well said. Very well said. Thanks for coming. We'll do
You
it again in
bet.
the fall.
My pleasure.
Good night and thank you.